6 months ago, I brought you the first variation of Gravity Lepic, designed for doing one thing and one thing really well, and that's pure crowd control. Since then, we've got new gear sets, new modules, new options for pumping up our weapon damage, and so much more. With Lepic now being up there with one of the best to run co-op in latter Purge runs, it's about time I dusted him off and gave you his definitive build. In this video, we'll be looking at how best to build Gravity 3.0 Lepic, talking what's changed since the last iteration, the modules and gear needed to maximise his godhood, and the overall playstyle so you can be up and running in no time. But what good is me talking about it without showing, so let's get to it. Now, of course, we're going to start with the modules as we always do, and we're going to be building that right in front of you. The main thing when it comes to Gravity Lepic is, of course, going to be to do with his traction grenade. Now, how this one works is that it has a relatively long cooldown, but don't you worry, we will be essentially making sure that we have 100% uptime of this nade, which is absolutely fantastic. It is probably one of the best ways to be able to crowd control in this entire game. It is fantastic for those Purge runs, because you can essentially just suck up all those enemies into one location and AoE damage, or just even making them a sitting duck ready to be able to absolutely blast them away with bullets. Anything to be able to do with your teammates is absolutely fantastic utility and one of the best things that exists inside this game. Now with this, obviously we do have to worry about that long cooldown. We do have an MP cost that is kind of on the high side, but of course with what the ability does, I can completely understand that. And of course, when it comes to the range, this is increasable by up to 300%, so of course we can absolutely go this all the way up to 27 meters. So this has insane reach, and it just basically reaches out, grabs everyone inside of a room, and just picks them up all up into one single location. Now there are a couple of enemies that are just ignore this kind of like status condition altogether. Anyone that's inside of like kind of like immune to kind of like skills or anything like that, so any of those kind of like void shields and things like that, until you break the shield, they are immune to that. Bosses obviously cannot be sucked into this. They are basically immune to any kind of form of like crowd control, similar to like that side of things. There are some elites that sometimes are a little bit stubborn, depending on like the type of animations they're doing. But if they're not being affected by a shield, a second one will absolutely start to pull them in. So you will be fine with that. But by and large, 99% of the time, you will be able to suck every single target into a single location and to be able to absolutely blast their face off. Alright then, so let's start talking about these module side of things. Let's kick it off with the Transcendence modules. Now, to be fair, you don't need a red mod whatsoever for this build to be able to work, but it does kind of help to be able to actually grab the right one. And there are a couple of great ones. The only downside is that if you start grabbing some of these, they actually do affect your passive, which is going to be Close Call. And I do think Close Call, if you actually build into the rest of this, like the way we're going to be doing with this, it's actually a really strong passive. The fact that we're able to essentially just ignore death once every 10 minutes is standard, and then obviously we can get that down even further if we do go into cooldown, is insane, and that allows us to be able to essentially just like soak up the damage ourselves, and we've got a great way of being able to like do revives, things like that. We essentially aren't on the floor as often as like other characters and everything like that. If you aren't careful, things like regenerative braking, for example, do change this, and it changes it so it completely overwrites what that passive is, and then of course then you kind of lose out of that benefit. So we are trying to avoid things like that. Now one of the best ones to be able to go for, unfortunately does not change that passive, is going to be Power Unit Change. As you can see, Close Call still exists, and what it does is it changes our skill 2, which is primarily there for skill build, and instead it changes it so that we have a firearm attack boost. Now of course when it comes to this, we are primarily going to be using firearms. It makes the most sense with weapon cores, it makes the most sense with how the build essentially kind of works. It essentially just is really nice amounts of damage. Essentially what this one does is that for a duration of up to 5 seconds, of course you can increase this even further, which we will be doing with this build. It gives you a 52% firearm attack increase, and it gives you a 52% explosive attack increase. This is not like a very small amount of increase to your amount of damage. It is a fantastic way of being able to boost up your last dagger, to be able to go into your Albion Cavalry, to go into your restored relics, anything like that, and be able to absolutely keep enemies in one single location and then absolutely soak the amount of damage by using Power Unit Change is kind of nutty, and it is 100% worth being able to maximize this out and being able to take up 5 points inside of your build. Now you probably will have to be able to, if you are going to follow this build that I'm doing, you will need to be able to put a catalyst into your sub attack module, but 100% it is absolutely worth to be able to go for Power Unit Change. Of course you don't need this red mod, so if you do want to kind of like keep hold of a couple of catalysts, if you're not absolutely able to be able to farm them as easily as possible and you don't have the space, you absolutely can drop this out. It doesn't matter too much, but it is a really nice thing to be able to go into, and it absolutely does complement the rest of the build. So let's talk about the rest of the modules that kind of go into this. Now, the first three kind of main areas, it's kind of a three-pronged attack that we need to be able to get the most out of Traction Grenade. We essentially need to work on its cooldown, we need to work on its range, and we need to work on its duration. Let's start off with the duration side of things, because that's quite simple to be able to actually get in here. We just essentially grab the two mods here of Skill Extension and Maximize Duration. By increasing this by 76.5%, you will also see that it will actually have a little bit extra going on because of the component set, which we will be discussing a little bit later on inside the video. But essentially this gets us up to currently 3.8 seconds, which is fantastic. Essentially it means that the grenade will stay active for that amount of time. This doesn't include the amount of time that the enemies will essentially drop down to the floor. It does give you a little bit of extra kind of like leeway. It does give you a bit more of a window before enemies then start trying to attack you again. But essentially this is still a fantastic duration, and this is more than enough for us to be able to work with. Swapping over to range though, we can start talking about that side of things. We do grab two mods here as well, so we will be grabbing Skill Expansion, and we will be grabbing Maximize Range. This is the best way to increase the amount of range that we do have in this ability, and while it's not enough to be able to hit cap, we are missing out on 1.2 meters when it comes to the radius side of things. This is more than enough to be able to absolutely grab everyone essentially inside of a room and be able to suck them up into that one location. So this is more than we need. We essentially don't need to go to that 27 meters. Of course, if you do manage to find other ways of being able to get into it and all that kind of thing, by all means go for it. It's never going to really hinder the build, but to be fair, this is more than enough for essentially what we need to be able to do, and 25.8 meters is kind of nutty. In fact, if I actually just show you what 25.8 meters looks like here, yeah, I'm pretty confident that some of you are accurate enough to be able to actually chuck that inside of a group of enemies and be able to actually get them all sucked up into one location. Now, just because cooldown is going to take up the vast majority of this build, let's start talking about the quality of life things. So we do go for an increased HP, because we will be looking to be able to have a little bit of survivability built into this build. And then lastly, we are also going to be going for maximized conservation, and the reason why we're going for that is to be able to help us out with the MP woes. As you can see, 45 MP is kind of nutty, so by grabbing this and being able to put it under that 30 MP means that we're essentially going to be constantly chucking these ones out. Now, to be fair, when it comes to Purge runs and everything like that, there's so many MP balls that exist on the floor, you might not actually need this, to be fair, but it's essentially just really nice quality of life. I would say that this is going to be your flex spot. If you want to be able to put in something else to really kind of help you out, if you want some more HP, feel free to be able to swap this one out and be able to go for that. Being able to go for the HP side of things, I think being able to go for a duration mod like Spatula Stamina, which goes into both of those, is a really nice way of being able to do it. Or alternatively, you can go for things like Stim Accelerant is a decent one, HP Amplification is probably the better one of the two, so you can get some really nice increases to the amount of HP that you've got, and that will allow you to be able to be a little bit more tanky and be able to survive a few more attacks. But of course, the last prong that we do need to be able to focus on is going to be cooldown, and every single one of these 4 slots is going to be dedicated towards that. So if we do type in cooldown, let's start talking about that. Nimble Fingers is always going to be up there. MP conversion is one of the best ways of being able to get skill cooldown. But the other two, we are going to be going into the focus on mods. Now, to be fair, if you don't have the capacity for these, you absolutely can use the base mods for this one. So you don't actually need to be able to have these fully maximized out. So for example, focus on tech, as well as focus on fire, if I could find it around here. Let's go find it, focus on fire, there it is. You don't need these fully maxed out, because essentially what we're purely using these for is going to be for that skill cooldown. And as you can see here, even on the base one, skill cooldown is still minus 6.1%. So you absolutely could go for the base ones, and that will allow you to be able to save on some capacity, ready for you to be able to use your power unit change. But if you do have the capacity, if you have gone fully invested into it, for example like a Colossus build, then you absolutely can go for the maximum ones, and that will allow you to be able to have a little bit of flexibility to be able to chuck out some of your nades and things like that, just for a little bit of extra AoE kind of form of damage. Now, with all this in mind, and obviously this is the full build, if we then have a look at Traction Grenade, including what we currently have as set up for our reactor as well as our component set, as you can see, our cooldown is a 3.6 seconds and our duration is 3.8 seconds, which allows us to be able to essentially have that 100% uptime. It is pretty nutty. It means that enemies will not be able to attack us, it means we're absolutely constantly sucking enemies into one location, and it means we're absolutely invaluable support when it comes to the rest of the team. Now swapping on over to the reactor side of things, it doesn't really matter what type of reactor you do go for. Ideally you would like a fire and tech one to be able to help you out, because then you will be benefiting from all that increase to the skill power. But to be completely honest with you, I'm using this frozen singularity one, so I'm not really getting any kind of bonuses whatsoever when it comes to this, and it's still absolutely fine because it's not affecting my weapons. Essentially the only thing we're after are those sub rolls, and the best ones in slot for this are going to be skill duration up as well as a combination of skill cooldown. Now of course my skill cooldown could be much better. I believe this does go up to 0.085, so even at 0.074 this is still more than enough to be able to have 100% uptime. You probably could get away with being able to go for a purple roll in this as well, because as you've seen we essentially have more than enough when it comes to the 100% uptime. We have actually a little bit of leeway, but essentially skill duration up and skill cooldown are absolutely crucial for this build, and the better rolls that you can get on this essentially makes the build even better across the board. So that is essentially what I'd recommend that you go out and farm, and being able to grab that will essentially allow you to be able to go into this build. Now components wise get a little bit on the tricky side. Now we did actually have a few selections when it comes to this. We do actually have a few decent options. Of course you can go for, if you want to go more firearm based and everything like that, if you want to go for example with Perforator especially, and you want to be able to go for even more crits to be able to do even more AoE damage, Acrobat is always going to be a fantastic way of being able to go into that with the increases to critical hit rates and everything like that. Annihilation set is still fantastic, being able to go into skill duration as well as increasing the amount of damage that you do as you start losing some of your health, so even more firearm attack to be able to go into that. Bravery recently got a bit of a change, allowing your skill cost to go down, but it also reduces your random skill cooldowns by 1 second every time an enemy is defeated, so that's a few ways that we can actually kind of mess about with that. But to be honest with you, the best way to be able to go into this is actually go into 2 sets with a 2-piece, and the best ones of that are going to be Hunter as well as Annihilation, because 2-piece into the Hunter gives you 4% skill cooldown, and Annihilation gives you plus 5.7% skill duration. Now if you are going into this set, and this is, like I said, this is the one I would recommend to yourself, I would recommend going for Hunter for the auxiliary power as well as the processor, because this gives you the best kind of rolls when it comes to HP wise, and then Annihilation is going to go for sensor and memory, because this gives you a nice defense roll as well as a max HP roll. So this is the best way to be around to be able to go for those pieces. Of course Hunter can be farmed from the Void Vessel side of things. Annihilation is pretty much just going to be rife and everywhere nowadays, with all the changes to 400%, and obviously with the new Colossus drops and everything like that. So I would highly recommend that you be able to go out there and start being able to farm for these sets to be able to get the right rolls. If you are looking for the right rolls for this, anything to be able to help you out with survivability as well as increases to your MP side of things. So in this case, max HP and MP recovery out of combat, max MP and MP recovery inside of combat, MP recovery modifier as well as defense, and then being able to go for a resistance as well as a shield is going to be probably one of the best ways to be able to actually rock this, and that is the one I would kind of recommend for yourself as well. Now weaponry wise, there's a lot of options for this, to be completely honest with you. You can go down the AoE route, you can go down the support route, you can go down actually going into firepower yourself to be able to help absolutely mop up some of the enemies that exist in front of you. In terms of like some of the best ones, it's probably better to actually say which ones you should probably avoid, but I'll actually go through a couple of examples that you can actually go for. If you want to go for the AoE route, you can go for Greg's Reverse Fate, you can absolutely go for Perforator, being able to go into that if you can manage to get a few more crits. This will absolutely be doing wonders if you manage to pair yourself up with an Enzo that's going to be increasing your critical hit rate. Absolutely could do that. Albion Cavalry Gun kind of falls into AoE as well as support, because you're able to apply stuns pretty much left, right and centre, so Albion Cavalry Gun is definitely up there. AoE wise, technically Voltia exists as both an option as well, because you are able to pop the shields as well as being able to do like AoE damage to enemies that pretty much exist right next to each other, so it's also a really nice option to be able to go for that. You absolutely could go for a Restored Relic if you have built this up correctly. I'm still currently building mine up like properly, just being able to try and farm for those green weapon cores is kind of doing my nuts in, to be honest with you, but Restored Relic is definitely up there as some of the better ones that you can actually go for. I've tried a little bit with Kingsguard Lance, but I don't think it's going to be the play. I know I have mentioned it in previous builds, so I just wanted to mention it here that I do think there are better options right now. But in terms of like if you want to go pure FP, like the amount of DPS that you will be chucking out and everything like that. Excava's pretty solid. I don't think it's the best in slot, but I do think it's pretty decent if you are going into an electric attacker type round, so you absolutely could go that route. But Last Dagger is pretty much meta right now. There isn't really anything that's going to be competing with this right now. This is being used by normal builds, it's being used by Glay, it's been built several different ways as well. It is just that versatile, it's just that fantastic. It keeps you nimble, it keeps you, like your movement speed doesn't hinder you whatsoever when it comes to that side of things. It is able to get itself up to essentially 100% critical hit rate without the need of a firearm build as well as like Enzo or anything like that. So being able to go into a firearm attack increase with power unit change, into Last Dagger, into the reload and everything like that, is a really nice amount of damage that you will be chucking out, and I highly recommend you do actually manage to get this fully catalyzed up and being able to have this equipped. I do think Last Dagger is probably the better one, but if you are going into a team environment and you're coordinating and things like that, feel free to be able to actually put a couple of weapons into your second and third slots, and then you can always swap back and forth depending on what the situation needs. Now, inversion-wise, let's talk about a couple of options. In terms of what I think is the best to be able to go for, I do think being able to go for neuroconcentration reinforcement, to be able to give yourselves ways to increase your max MP as well as your MP recovery modifier, is one of the best ways to go. Survival-wise, antibody explosion is going to be one of the better ways of being able to give yourself a little bit of durability against all the resistance that's going to be coming your way. So every single like elemental attack, which pretty much exists across every single one of the Purge runs. So this is going to be helping you out in terms of like survival and durability and things like that. The one thing that I will say that tricks you is probably going to be arcade boost. You absolutely could get away with being able to use traction grenade, follow it up with one of your skill ones for your grenade to be able to hit everyone that's inside that pile, to be able to then get that skill cooldown. But to be honest with you, I don't think it's really worth it. I think there's better options, especially seeing you can only activate 3. But the third one 100% has to go to your attribute column here. This is going to be your focus rounds that you will be applying depending on the run that you will be going into. So depending on the level, if you are going into one that's weak to electric, grab electric. If you are going into weak into toxic, grab toxic, etc, etc. Essentially, these are the best ones to be able to go for, and because it is a weapon-based build, being able to grab focus rounds is just fantastic, and you probably are throwing if you aren't grabbing your focus rounds when it comes to these types of builds, especially inside of the Purge runs. Being able to reduce resistance as well as being able to increase the amount of damage you will be chucking out, ones that are actually matching to the like the resistance and everything like that to some of the enemies. It's probably one of the best ways to be able to actually complete some of those runs, so I do think you need to be able to go into the attribute side of things. One key note to be able to note here is that if you are going into, you will be chucking out all your skills and everything like that. When it comes to Quantum Domain, if you're activating your skill 2 for your power unit change, as well as being able to chuck out your traction grenade, you will be building up stacks of this. This will essentially get you to the rest of that skill effect, of being able to increase the amount of range and everything like that. So you will be building up stacks of Quantum Domain, so as you work your way through the level, you will be essentially getting more and more range on top of your traction nade, and then essentially once you get to near the end, you'll essentially have max range and you'll have hit cap. So you've got different ways of being able to actually get there, but essentially this is why it's not so important to be able to actually maximize when it comes to the module side of things. And with all that out of the way, that wraps it up on the video for Lepic's Gravity 3.0 build. Now, while this build type did start out as a bit of fun way to be able to get the use out of Lepic inside of defense missions, it's great to see that he's finally got a place inside this metagame, being casually used in team scenarios for Purge runs and other content. He may have slightly fell off as a bossing character, but his new home is just as comfy. But this is a section I want to hear from you. Have you tried out any of the 3 Gravity builds over the month since it was released? What's your go-to gun for use for him as support? And lastly, who's excited to see what Serena can do? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video, and as I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on the next video.